Hey guys,
Hey guys, how's it going?
it's going okay. We'll give it a few more minutes because we usually have some late joiners. Um, I'll share the doc in chat. If you go to today's date, the 23rd, feel free to add yourself as a participant. You can mention your company, affiliated company, if you feel like it. Okay, it's 3 after, so I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks everybody for attending. I think I see some new faces, so what we'll do really quickly first is if you'd like to introduce yourself, go ahead and raise your hand, and then we can take time to do that. You can raise your hand virtually, I mean with a reaction. That way we can get everybody who feels like introducing themselves. Okay, so yeah, first, go ahead, Brian.
Hi everyone, I'm Brian Jen. I'm a software engineer at Harness.
Very cool. I think I saw Victor next.
Hey, yeah, Vic from DevCycle, product manager and SDK engineer.
Very cool. Kobe, am I getting that right?
Head of product at DevCycle.
Very cool. Nick.
Hey, Nick, director of engineering at DevCycle with Kobe and Vic.
Cool. A lot of DevCycle people. And Thomas, I think.
Yeah, Thomas. I'm creating a library called Go Feature Flag, so I'm interested in what happened here.
Great. So yeah, good to meet all of you guys. Since we have so many people from DevCycle, does anybody want to quickly give an explanation of what DevCycle is and why you guys are interested in OpenFeature? I'm not familiar with the company.
Yeah, sure. I guess quick rundown, just pretty simple feature management tool focused on kind of like the full life cycle of feature management. So not just trying to focus on like the DevOps side, but also how do we handle like beta management and all that stuff kind of like through one interface. But yeah, we came across kind of like the OpenFeature project and just wanted to be participants. So interested in obviously like learning more and understanding kind of everything. And I think we signed up a couple weeks ago to be participants, but yeah.
Cool, very cool. All right, so before we go further, I guess, do we have any volunteers for a scribe? We usually have one person nominated for every meeting to kind of just add notes to the agenda under the sub items as we go. Anybody want to raise their hand to do that? Thanks, Justin. Appreciate it. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Actually, maybe somewhat unfortunately, I don't see Viert here, who is, I think, going to talk about his draft proposal first. So maybe we'll start with my items, and then we'll see if we can circle back. Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so there was, this one should be really quick, but there's a linked issue 84. I know that Justin and Viert and I went over this a little bit, back and forth, and I think maybe we're landing in a place where we can potentially close this. But I did ping quite a few people on this, so especially if you're developing an SDK, I know Dave's been working a lot on the Golang one. You might want to take a quick look at the last few parts of this issue. Basically, we're looking at maybe escape hatches might be a good way to describe them, but like some places within the OpenFeature spec that you might be able to get an instance of the wrapped client SDK. So, you know, if you're wrapping some vendor SDK and it has a feature that maybe OpenFeature doesn't have an abstraction for, there may be some desire to get the instance of the client SDK, or at least get the provider for that instance, and then maybe in the provider call a custom method to get that that vendor instance. Obviously, adding things like that kind of adds complexity, and it also you know, moves away from a common abstraction and kind of suggests that you could use things that are not common abstractions. So something that we want to have some consideration around, make some consideration around. In the particular use case that's brought up in that issue, which I think is pretty interesting, Justin actually made the observation that the use case can be accomplished with hooks, for instance. So that would be a more OpenFeature idiomatic way to do the same thing. So yeah, especially if you're developing an SDK, maybe take a quick look at that and see if the proposal makes sense. And actually, you know, I might add a specific link to where I reopened this issue, just because there was an existing issue that I reopened here. Okay, so that's point one. So the other thing I think I'd like to hit on is the Contribs repo update. So we have a repo. I believe it's publicly accessible now. It might not be because it's just getting started. Let me just see. So yeah, the Node.js Contribs repo, I'll also link that in here. So for those of you guys that are a little bit out of the loop, we have this concept of a Contribs repo. So along with the kind of core SDK, there's also probably for every language a need for having this additional repository that would contain providers, open source providers for various vendors, perhaps. I mean, there's no need to have providers live here, as well as hooks. So one of the key ones that we'd like to have implemented is, especially in our alpha releases, is an OpenTelemetry integration hook. So basically a way to add OpenTelemetry metrics and spans to any flag evaluation in a standard way, without actually directly adding OpenTelemetry dependencies to our SDK. So basically it's, you know, the Contribs repo for every language is a place where people can add essentially extensions, additional contributions on top of open features, be it hooks or provider implementations, that kind of thing. So I kind of really wanted to throw that out there because we also talked within the last few meetings. It's one of the things I think Justin brought up and made an issue for, about what our alpha goals look like and what our alpha kind of languages would be, our alpha platforms basically. And I kind of wanted to throw out there that this might be something that we have as a requirement for an alpha SDK release, Maybe not. I just wanted to see what everybody thought about that, because especially if we're talking about something like open telemetry integration, that's kind of a key selling point for OpenFeature. And if we don't want to bake that into the SDK, then we need a place to house it. It doesn't have to be super mature, and it doesn't have to be a mono repo necessarily. Maybe there's other paradigms in various languages that are better for that. But I wanted to put that out there. I don't know if anybody has any ideas or comments on that one.
So I can comment about Java SDK. I've not considered a no-tell hook as a requirement for alpha, because I think that there's plenty of information that we can get about the usability of the interfaces we've provided without necessarily having an OTel provider. That said, like if we had a no-tell provider, I'd use it. But I also have the bias that we don't have a ubiquitous usage of OTel within eBay.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing is hooks are pretty basic, right? Like even the hotel hook itself, in like the current implementation we have, is just a few lines of code. I mean, the interesting thing about the hotel hook is that it actually connects to every lifecycle stage, but it's basically just like create a span, add data to a span, close a span. It's not overly complicated. So it would be very easy for anyone who was interested in that to write their own, even if there was no centralized place to do that. They could have their own implementation. So and maybe it shouldn't be a blocker for an alpha. As far as like patterns for creating some kind of contribution repo, like something like where arbitrary packages could be published maybe from a single location. I know that's a pretty popular paradigm in Node. I don't know if anybody has ideas around how we could structure repositories for other languages to support that. If a mono repo makes the most sense, or if we would just have a whole bunch of different packages kind of living disparately, that feels like it could become a little bit disorganized and challenging, but maybe something to think about as we mature.
Yeah, I think one of the ones where Golang it might be a bit tougher, right? Because I guess when you publish, the package is really tied to the GitHub repo and the tag in that repo. So if we had a bunch of different providers in there, every time we rev that would be increasing the version for everyone. But that might be the only outlier, I guess. We must need to look at a language by language basis and see what's. I guess anywhere where you actually build and publish a package, it's probably not an issue. It's more like Go kind of relies heavily on Git. I think that's the gotcha.
Yeah, it's a one-to-one with Go and repositories, right? And packages and repositories. So that makes sense. It may be a bit of an outlier. Okay, definitely stuff that we can come back to, especially as those languages get closer to an official release. And I think I agree with your conclusion, Justin. I don't think it needs to be a requirement. And we are a little bit farther ahead with the JavaScript contribs now. So if we see that working or not working, we'll be able to apply those lessons learned to other languages and platforms. Now that Viard has joined, I'm wondering if we want to pivot back to your point for the draft proposal you have. Are you ready to talk about that, Viard?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, now.
Good. Yeah, I'm ready. So I wanted to propose the one that was already ticket about for the event tracking. Firstly, I think based on the custom events functionality that I found in other vendors like Launch Darkly and a few others, I think we can just keep it really simple and just have like a track or track event, or I don't know how we exactly want to call it. And then just like event name, and then you can pass like something similar for the future flag functionality, where you can pass a context, and it will be then like all the extra metadata or data you want to send along with the event. Yeah, I was thinking just something like this, and then this would be then a function that can be implemented by a provider, and could be like a no operating function when the provider doesn't support it or throw an exception or something like that. That was my idea. The only problem I have, if people are happy with this idea and what thing I just proposed, I'm only not sure how I can like write this down, because I don't fully understand the exact structure or what is expected of like a specification proposal. I did have this draft PR where I started writing something, but it doesn't really make much sense to me yet how I should fill in my proposal for a spec. So yeah, that's it in short.
Well, I can certainly work with you if you'd like to try and spec that out. I think it would be a smaller spec, but perhaps some background is necessary too for people here, because I know that not every vendor has such a concept. Some of the vendors I'm familiar with do, but it is a subset of even the ones I'm familiar with. So maybe maybe to like
Yeah.
high level explain what the track is.
So at work we are using Postdoc for our product analytics and feature flagging functionality, and they allow you to define feature flags, and then so you have like persons or like people you want to target for your feature flag, and you can send events, and these events can then become a property on the person. So that will mean you can send an event that something happened, or like user clicked on the order button, and that might, you can then set like this, if you can then set something on the person like has ordered for first time, and then you could target, and you could use that property in your future flag. So you say if you want to do an A/B test where a user has already ordered something in the past, then enable this, or otherwise not. So that's why I would like to have this tracking functionality, because that way I can help control my feature flagging environment, because the events that get tracked can be dependent on in the feature flags that we specify in our environment. And also some of the features that I raised earlier about being able to access the vendor client instance. In Postdoc, most, or I think all of these identify user, group identify, and functionality like that is all event based. So if we would have this track, the ability to send a custom event, then all those cases would be solved too. I'm not sure if like other vendors also have this possibility that you can like have feature flags depend on specific events having being sent. Maybe that's specific to Postdoc, but I think it would also be nice to have this capability. Like you could, instead of you could, in the provider, you could use maybe Google Analytics just to send these kind of analytics.
We have a similar concept to this at eBay for our A/B testing framework. I'd be curious to know if there are open source experimentation providers that aren't feature flag specific, and if there's a common tracking standard they use. I know eBay has gone through several iterations of tracking standards, and I can pass this around internally to get API sniff test help. But it's certainly something that we will continue to use, and if there was an OpenFeature client for it that matched our API, I would see no reason why we shouldn't use the open source thing.
Yeah, and I know. Sorry, go ahead.
You're good.
Yeah, I know that both. I mean, I'm just reaching from memory, but I believe both Split and LaunchDarkly have similar functionality. So I know that some don't, but so I think there's some philosophical, differences in whether or not some feature flag providers think that this sort of thing is within their wheelhouse. Yeah, but I think it could be something we want to support. I think the thing that could be tricky is that because some vendors don't even have this as a concept, there's a little bit of an impedance mismatch there. So I think that what was mentioned before, I can't remember who mentioned it. Actually, maybe it was you, Justin, but like, there's no reason that we couldn't have, composite providers or even multiple providers. So for example, we may make the tracking provider distinct from the flagging provider so that, you could have a tracking provider, which may or may not be distinct from your flagging provider. So in some cases, a vendor that supports tracking could be both of those things, but also maybe you could plug in Segment as a tracking provider or something like that if you're using a feature flag vendor that doesn't support that as a concept. And of course, everything can no-op, right? So everything kind of by default would probably just no-op. So if you just register feature flagging and then you call a track, nothing would happen. That's my high level thought, but I think that type of thing would probably need to be handled by your proposal provider, if I'm tracking correctly. And I don't know if other people have ideas around that either, but I think there's enough concepts around it in the industry that it's probably worth us exploring. I know that in some cases it's used as kind of like a finish line for feature flagging in terms of and in terms of really, business value, right? So if you have some arbitrary goal that's represented by a track event, it allows you the ability to use it, feature flagging to do some experimentation to see how that end result is actually achieved. So it does make sense, especially in that context, I think. But that's my high level take. Probably worth us speccing out. Maybe not for an alpha.
I think the one thing I would say is please not for an alpha.
Yeah,
I think just speaking generally, I think this is where things are going to start getting, just some sort of like kind of hard decisions are going to have to get made, because there's serious impedance mismatch across all of the providers from my experience. People just have different opinions on how stuff should work. So the kind of simple, the trivial case is fairly straightforward because it is just a Boolean, right? I guess. I mean, and even for some providers, it's not even as simple as that. I guess from my point of view, as long as, like, it's not going to be a simple, like, change the provider string, package name or whatever, and where you go, like, that's totally unattainable, as long as people understand when they're sort of going down a path that's, with a certain degree of lock-in to a particular provider. But yeah, I think there's going to start, as we start digging down, there's going to be more and more of these things where things just, no-op or return false seal, whatever. But I think that's just the nature of the beast, right? It's like, it's an opinionated product. And I can't even think of it as an open source, pure, like, multivariate testing framework. Can't think of one.
Yeah, I also think we already have this similar issue that not all feature flag vendors support something different, and there are plenty of ones that don't support the object, like having a JSON structure or anything similar. Some only support like a name of a variant and like a Boolean flag, and that's it. So no numbers or like any like dynamic config style flags. So for example, PostUp doesn't support that you have like like a JSON structure as a feature flag value. So in my post provider, it basically gets ignored and doesn't do anything, or it tries to like pass something into a JSON structure, but it doesn't do much. So in that regard, I don't think there's like a lot of major difference between future vendors that don't support like this kind of eventing and like vendors that don't support all the three main feature flag types, like Boolean, number, and config.
It may be worth doing some surveying before we spec anything out. I mean, we did that a lot with the feature flag APIs. Like there's still research doc hanging out there from the early days when we were kind of, trying to decide how our API should look. When we did a lot of survey of the existing landscape, existing vendors, and existing open source solutions. And I mean, I would say that there was generally a lot of cohesion. But to Ben's point, there may not be as much cohesion with tracking. So we should, but yeah, it is probably worth understanding what we're getting ourselves into before we address it with this spec. Probably. So maybe the takeaway should be to do some research first. I mean, we can open up a research issue and just look at the vendors that do support tracking and see how similar those APIs are.
Okay, yeah. Do we already have a list of like future flag vendors? I guess like the members of OpenFeature and anything else? Or?
Yeah, that's a good place to start. Is the you can look at the interested in the same page as the interested party and community. There's a list of vendors. The playground also has providers with a whole bunch of vendors. You can look at that too.
The ones that aren't captured that I think are probably also relevant are places like Google Analytics. I think has tracking events, and Optimizely will have tracking events, like marketing stuff. We'll have a notion of what tracking events are. We should look at those.
Yeah, but for what it's worth as well, Harness, like we haven't done this, but we get a lot of requests about it, so it's something we're looking at. So if there's any kind of discussion, I'm happy to help or feedback kind of what we know about it.
Okay, yeah, cool.
Just to add one thing as well, there's also a big question about, so like Flagsmith, we do those tracking integrations on the server side, kind of automatically. I think there's a big design split about whether they're happening, like actually where the SDK is runtime execution or somewhere else. I don't even know how the other providers do that yet.
Sorry, so what was the question? You mean like the tracking of each event, whether that's done on the server side or on the...
Yeah, like if you're tracking against Amplitude, events against Amplitude, for example, like what's sending the event data to Amplitude, the client device or a server or something else.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay, well, it feels like we probably have enough here to consider this issue discussed. I think what I'll do as a takeaway is I'll create an issue in research to do some research with this. I won't necessarily assign it to anyone, but at least I'll create it and hopefully I'll try to capture everything we talked about here. And I'll ping you on it, Byers, so you can add anything that you want to add.
Okay, yeah, cool. Thank you.
I was going to do a demo, but I think we can leave that to the end. So let's make sure we get to all our discussion. Justin, it looks like you added something about sandbox status. Do you have a question?
Yeah, as a question probably for Oleg. Do you know when sandbox status is going to be figured out for us? I got him on a bio break.
Yeah, we might have. Before, hopefully he's back soon. But what I would add is we have been accepted as a sandbox project by the CNCF. I'll let Oleg respond.
Yes, so first of all, we were accepted. After we are accepted, there is a bunch of steps that need to be performed before we are officially considered even as a sandbox project. There is a checklist. We talked with Mike Beamer, who would be working on that, but ultimately there is a lot of logistics to be done. Transferring accounts, domain ownership, registering mailing lists, chapters on Berry, etc., etc. So everything will need to be done before we could say that we are officially on the CNCF. In addition, there are announcements. So I made a proposal to Michael. He said he wants to work on graphics, and I haven't received any feedback after that. So it's basically on his plate right now. So from what I know, Mike is off this week because he's doing roadshow somewhere in Austria. So I'm not sure when we get the response.
Cool. I'd love to get be like a roadmap type thing set up so we can get visibility into the process to figure out how we can help, if we can help, what the status is.
So there is a GitHub issue which lists the main things to be done. So it's somewhere on the CNCF, I can find it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I would be happy with that. That sounds perfect.
Yeah, I'm just looking for that.
Yeah, when you find it, just attach it to the meeting notes. Yeah, and the reason that I think it's been a little bit under wraps, like, is because I was a little bit intimidated about saying anything about it, because apparently how we communicated about it, it's very rigorously defined. Like, we have to say it's sandbox, we can't say anything other than sandbox. So it's like, until we had all of our ducks in a row with that, I didn't want to even put anything in chat. So just keep that in mind. Like, there is specific rules around how you communicate about being in the CNCF. So we're officially sandbox, but it's just sandbox. So I don't think Oleg, correct me if I'm wrong, but like, we could basically get our wrist slapped by saying we're in the CNCF at this point, because we're in the CNCF only as sandbox.
Yes.
Are there CNCF helicopters that come and...
Yeah, exactly. They rappel down into your house.
Yeah, what team needs to be aware of the fact that sandbox projects in the CNCF are not a part of the CNCF also doesn't make sandbox projects eligible for any CNCF and the Linux Foundation services, including LFX security or LFX insights. Some services, basically, they get provided anyway. Like, if you want to do mentorship on LFX mentorship, you can do that. But there are no services or paid infrastructure provided. I guess nobody wants to get a free Jira instance from the Linux Foundation. But if you want, you need to become an incubating project for that.
Okay, so I wrote this in the notes. We are in the CNCF sandbox is proved. We are in the CNCF not approved.
yeah, exactly. So I think Alois, who hasn't been with us for a couple of meetings now, but my understanding is that Alois was going to immediately move on to the next stage as soon as possible. I think that was his plan. So, you know, I guess more to come on that. I'll try and get that. Maybe it'd be good to see if we can get him in the next community meeting. I'll see if I can.
Yeah, for the record, it took Captain almost 1 year to get to the next stage since we applied. So even if we apply
we're trying
now,
to beat speed records.
it's not difficult in the case of Captain. I mean, OpenFeature definitely has more visibility and more industry pressure. I mean, just taking people on this call from different organizations, I think that it can be justified well. don't forget that OpenTelemetry became an incubating project less than 1 year ago. So things might be a bit difficult sometimes.
Yeah.
Thank you for shepherding us through this process.
Mhm.
Thanks a lot, Oleg. Yeah, so like I said, I had a demo and we can hold that to the very end. So if anybody has anything else they want to add, go ahead, go first, raise your hand. Otherwise, I'll just go ahead with what I was planning on demoing. Okay, so what I will be demoing is an end-to-end use of our operator and flag-D working together to basically do cloud native like flag evaluation in Kubernetes and just a cluster I'm running locally. So keep in mind flag-D right now reads from a file, so that's the only provider it has. But as I was just talking to Dave Johnson earlier, one of the cool things about flag-D is that it basically is using interfaces very similar to that in the Golang SDK. So hypothetically, we could swap out the provider in flag-D to talk to any vendor backend if we had Golang provider implementations for that particular vendor. So yeah, right now we're basically reading from a mounted config map that is mounted through a custom resource definition for a flag. So basically you'll see me update flags in like Kube native ways. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. You guys can see what that looks like. This stuff is pretty new, so I hope it all works without problems. So I have a cluster running here. This is just basically a vanilla kind of cluster. I have 3 nodes on it, as well as a master node. And I'm going to install some stuff. So first thing I'm going to do is create a. Can you guys see my screen? I hope you all can.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to create a namespace. For OpenFeature, I have to install cert manager so that we have valid certificates. So I'm going to do that. That usually takes a while before it goes green. Just wait for that to start up. Or install some self-signed certs. Cool. So I should be able to install the cert now. Great. And just running a build in the other tab here. So now we have a Kubernetes cluster with all the basics in there. And now I'm going to install our operator. So this is installing locally, but this is pushed up too. So we'll see the OpenFeature operator should start up here in a second. Okay, cool. So what this guy is going to do is it's going to use a mutating emission webhook to basically mutate incoming workloads to kind of load in flag-D to them as a sidecar. So again, what's happening here is we have a flag evaluation engine essentially running out of process in flag-D. So flag-D is that standalone Go app that really can talk to eventually any vendor backend. And it's going to be basically injected into whatever workloads we have that are annotated accordingly. So that those workloads have like a sidecar running with them out of process that they can do flag evaluation with. And that way, they're completely agnostic of how that is running. So there's absolutely no changes to the application itself. It's just communicating to that flag-D process. So I'm going to go ahead and deploy our workload. I'll show you what the workload actually looks like. It's very simple. So I have this end-to-end file. So this has a few things in it. There's exactly 3 things in it. I'll start from the end because this is just simple Kubernetes artifacts. This is a service that exposes our application. Very basic, just exposes it over a node port. This is our application itself. It's just the OpenFeature demo app that you might remember, the Fibonacci demo. It's just a very basic Node.js application. The relevant part is it has these annotations. So these say that OpenFeature is basically on, and it specifies a custom resource definition instance to attach to this workload. And that's what's defined above. So here you'll see our, the same end-to-end CRD mentioned, and you see some flags are defined here. So there's a few flags. These are all the ones that we need for our demo application. So I'm just going to deploy this whole thing in one go. I already have this command copied somewhere else. And that should work. It looks like it created everything. So now it's going to create my workload. And so you can see here, we have my demo application, but also in the same pod, we have a different container for flag D. So these are going to get pulled and hopefully soon start up. The app does generally take a while to start up because it's a very slow Nest app. But hopefully that comes online soon. It looks like it's running. Cool. Okay. So we have a workload with flag D in it. I should be able to access it here. Yes, I can. Amazing. Okay, so let's just do a really basic change. So this background is red. I'm going to go into that same file I showed you before. And I'm going to change the value of the hex color to blue. Save this. I'm going to reapply the same configuration. So you can see some things were unchanged, but one thing was changed. So the feature flag definition end to end, so the actual values of the feature flag were changed. So now if we go back to K9, we should see this is still running. We may, this is the logs from flag D. So eventually what's going to happen here is you should see this guy say that he got an update for a particular CRD. So what's happening right now is Kubernetes is basically going through a reconciliation loop. And there you go. You can see what happened is, oh, I see that you changed the definition of this custom resource. So I'm going to go in and change a config map, and it changes the underlying config map that flag D is listening to without restarting any processes. So no pods were restarted here. Nothing like that was changed at all. That's kind of the whole point of feature flagging, is you don't want to do any redeployments or whatever. We basically just dynamically change the flag values, and look, the app is blue. So that's how that works. You really control anything this way. So in a vendor situation, so this is again like our kind of inbuilt CRD with a feature flag defined. In a vendor, we're thinking of having something like this, like provider vendor X, right? And then you wouldn't need to define a feature flag. You might, if that vendor supports some kind of API integration to define flags in their system via this definition. But at a minimum, you could say, hey, my provider's vendor X, and your CRD would probably also just take a reference to a secret to authenticate with that vendor, and then flag D would be getting its values from that vendor. So we're close to having that working. I think we really need the Golang SDK to be finished before we go ahead and implement that. But yeah, I hope this demo kind of clarified what some of the goals are with some of the cloud native stuff. So if you have any questions, go ahead.
Yeah, it looks really cool. I have a question. I don't know that much about Kubernetes, but so if you would have this daemon and you, for example, you have like Nginx running, could you also use it to like redirect traffic to two different pods depending on if a feature flag is on and off?
Absolutely. Yeah. So flag D itself just is a process that's injected really into any pod. So hypothetically, you could do what you mentioned by deploying an Nginx pod with some custom. It's been a while since I've done this, but I know Nginx supports custom Lua extensions. So you can basically write some Lua on top of Nginx to do anything you want. So you could hypothetically
Okay.
write some Lua that would say, hey, look at flag D on this local port and
Okay.
then use
Cool.
it to make some routing decision.
Cool. I will experiment with it. Cool. Thank you.
Any other questions? Cool. That's all I had. So all of this is committed between the two repos, the OpenFeature operator repo and the flag D repo. Currently, what we don't have is any kind of rule evaluation in flag D, but I actually have a PR open for that. If you're interested, go take a look. Yeah, that's all I had. Does anybody else have anything they wanted to add before we finish off the meeting?
Just really briefly, we merged in the sort of first stab at the Python SDK. It's there if you're interested in Python. We haven't started writing any sort of adapters yet, but yeah, if anyone has any contributions, that'd be good.
Very cool.
I'm going to cut an alpha release for Java today.
Cool. Where's the party reaction? There it is. Yeah, thanks for that, both of you guys. I'm okay at Java and definitely know nothing about Python, so it's really encouraging to see people who are comfortable with both those languages contributing. And it's been a good learning opportunity for me to just watch the Python SDK development as well as the Java one. Okay, thanks, guys.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure. Go ahead, Nick.
Okay. Yeah. So, myself, Kobe, Vic, who had to drop. We're all pretty excited to be part of this. To be honest, I came pretty unprepared. How can we better contribute to this kind of meeting, like for the next one? Is there any place that we could get started? Like,
You're with a vendor, is that right?
Yeah.
It would be awesome if you could look through the spec or one of the SDKs, like the Java or JavaScript one, and validate that hits the thing like you can make your thing work in that context. That would be really useful. And if you wanted to try a language of your flavor, whichever SDK you have, and try to integrate it into, like, basically write a provider in Java to try to see if you can make it work, that would also be pretty.
Yeah, awesome. We'd love to. This seems really exciting.
Yeah, Justin's totally right. I think writing a provider is the most helpful thing you can do for us. That's where we've found a lot of where we need to like make changes, and it can just validate our strategies.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no problem. The other thing I would say in general is you can add yourself to the interested parties in the community doc. I'll add that to the Google Doc. But yeah, there's a community repo, and you can add yourself as interested parties there, just so kind of we have your stuff on record if you're not there already.
Great.
Okay, thanks again.
Bye.